Some businesses statistically have very high failure rates. Now, that doesn't mean that you should never start such a business. There's actually a lot of outliers, a lot of big businesses who are in these categories of businesses that could be considered businesses that ideally you shouldn't start because the failure rates are very high, and they're actually very successful. Very many huge businesses. A lot of times, of course, these huge businesses are actually the reason for the failure, and they are the reasons that you should not start these businesses. But it's not like you shouldn't join the industry because there's a lot of failure there. No, it simply means that you need to tread with a lot of cautions. You need to be very ready when you're starting the business. Understand that you probably need to do a little bit more work than it would require in some kinds of businesses, and pay more attention to ensure that just like these other businesses, you don't end up down the drain. So in today's video, we're going to go through some of these businesses whose failure rates are actually really high. Before we actually dive into them, it would be important for you to understand that the biggest reason that businesses actually fail is because of no cash flow, terrible cash flow. You need money to do something, to do a purchase, to stock up on something, and the money is not present. And if you have no money, you're going to have to close. So if you're going to be running a business, you need to prioritize cash flow. And a lot of times these businesses close because cash flow becomes a problem. First, we have the construction industry. Now, the construction industry is actually quite notorious for high failure rate. Only about 40% will be running by 5 years' time. What that means is that there's a lot of failure. And the biggest cause of failure in this industry is because of, number one, the very high costs of material, and number two, the high labor costs. So if you're starting, you need to understand that, first of all, it's very competitive. You know, there are a lot of people who actually offer these construction services, but you have to foot quite the bill in order to even just be able to start. To get the materials that you actually need to simply construct a house, you're going to foot quite an amount of money. So if you don't do it well the very first time, you're already going to be losing money. Also, there is a lot of labor costs. Yeah, you need quite a number of skilled people. If you're doing construction is mainly done by human beings for the biggest percentage, and so you're going to need a lot of people involved. It's not like some other businesses, maybe like a tech business, where you could just need 2-3 people to run the entire thing. This requires a lot of people with a lot of dynamics, yeah, and that also is the other problem. There's a lot of dynamics in the construction industry, a lot of changes consistently happening, and you need to make sure that you consistently keep up. So if you're not consistently keeping up, and also you have to deal with the very high costs of labor and then materials, you're soon going to find yourself at a point where you literally don't have enough cash flow to keep the business going, and you're going to end up closing. But the other problem, and one of the most common reasons these businesses fail, is because of failure of people to actually manage the businesses properly. It's simply because a lot of the people who actually run construction businesses are very skilled and trained people who are actually quite talented at construction but not very good at management. Now, this is a concept that I actually once came across in a book. It's called the E-Myth, and in this book they give the concept of people who are very technical but have very terrible managerial skills. Someone who is very good at constructing and building a house might not be the very best at running a business. And this is the same reason actually behind the failure of a lot of the other businesses that commonly fail. It's because people think they have the ability to, for example, build a house. They think they will run a construction company, which is quite complicated. It has a lot of dynamics, and it leads to a lot of failures. Number two is restaurant business. Now, this is also one of the very worst. Imagine in your life how many restaurants you've seen open and close. So often, yeah? And one of the biggest reasons is because of the competitive nature of the restaurant business. Very, very, very competitive. There's restaurants literally everywhere. So because of that, you have to stand out for you to actually make it to the top. But therein becomes the problem. First, the startup cost of restaurant is actually quite high. Yeah, for you to get a restaurant which will offer the very best customer experience and client experience, usually you're going to part with quite an amount of money in order to make sure that the ambience, what the place looks like, is really good, to hire the very best staff, to make sure that these staff are properly trained. You're going to spend quite an amount of money. So that means that your risk of failing is very low. So after investing all this amount of money, you know, just to start up, you don't have a single client who has walked in, but you've already spent a lot of money. If you make a single mistake, you're going to be left with completely no cash flow in the business, and just like that, you're going to close up. But also, the other problem in the restaurant business is also the same problem faced by the construction business, and that is the issue of failing to manage the business. You'll find that a lot of the successful restaurant chains, it's because they have done a proper managerial hierarchy and system and everything. A lot of them will simply be chains, you know, the KFCs, the McDonald's and all those kinds of things, because there's something that they have perfected and they know how to do it. But if it's simply someone who's just starting a private restaurant, a lot of times it's someone who's probably just passionate about cooking, or they love food, trained in food, and they think because they can cook properly, they can also run a restaurant business properly. It doesn't always equate that same way, and a lot of times these people are going to fail when clients are not walking in and all of a sudden you don't have money to do things. Also, the other thing that's common with the restaurant business is that there are a lot of unforeseen expenses. A lot. You'll have a plan at the beginning, but before you know it, you're running out of money because there are a lot of things that you didn't predict, a lot of things that you didn't expect. For example, the prices of food might change. They might double, they might triple in a very short time. You might have a lockdown, something like that, and the lockdown comes, you have a lot of overhead expenses like rent that you need to pay for, electricity, transport expenses if you're doing deliveries, things like that, and you're not going to be able to handle, for example, a lockdown when you still have to pay rent, when you have staff who you consistently need to pay and you're not bringing in money. You're going to have to be forced to close. Number 3 is retail business. This probably has the highest failure rate amongst all of them, and it's simply because the saturation on the market is too high. Very, very, very high. The market is really saturated, and so it doesn't literally give you room for error. You're going to have competition with online businesses that a lot of times will actually do delivery to clients at even lower rates. They are competing with you. For you have places where you need to pay rent, a lot of other overhead expenses, maybe electricity and things like that. You're not going to handle to compete with these other guys. Sometimes you're going to be competing with, you know, the very small retailers who have very, very low overhead expenses. They don't have employees, you know, who they need to pay. It's just one person in their family running the thing. So everyone in their neighborhood will simply buy things from the closest person. So what that means is that the competition is very, very high, and it's generally quite difficult to keep up a retail business. Because of that, the failure rate is so high. Number 4 is software / internet business. Now this might come as a surprise because as much as you might know, some of the biggest companies, if not almost all the biggest companies in the world, actually software or internet-based businesses. Things like Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, they're all internet businesses. But what you need to understand is that whilst a lot of them are actually very profitable, the failure rates are actually very high. Yeah, for the very few that you actually see get to the top and actually make a lot of money, those that do fail are so many. And the reason is because, first of all, the competition is quite high, but secondly, it is very, very dynamic. Things are consistently changing over here and over there. Things are changing all the time. And so if you don't keep up with the market trends, if you're not consistently improving and changing things and keeping up with the market trends, which is honestly quite hard to do because that requires a lot of money. A lot of these companies are investing a lot of money. The money Apple is investing, Samsung, Google, they're investing a lot of money to consistently be at the top and outcompete the others. So for you, if you come and you don't have a lot of money, things are changing, you need to invest in a lot of money to be able to keep up, you're going to end up closing. And the thing with software and internet businesses is that you need to make sure that you create a unique proposition. You need to make sure that you identify yourself. If whatever you're providing doesn't identify you very uniquely from the rest of the competition, your thing is going to die. And so many of them have died. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. For everyone that actually goes through and makes it to the top, so many are failing. So the failure rates are actually quite high. Number 5 is electronics business. Now, this one is quite obvious. The competition is actually very, very high. There's people selling electronics and involved in electronic businesses everywhere. While the dynamics are a lot, things are consistently changing. What you have right now, in a few months' time, they're going to be outdated. So what that means is that you consistently need to invest. Your cash flow needs to be proper. You need to make sure that you have money coming in consistently. You need to make sure that you convince the market to buy from you, and that's quite difficult in an industry where there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of people buying things are consistently changing. What is in demand right now is going to be very different from what's in demand a few months later. You need to consistently make sure you play around with your stock. You need to be very certain of what you're stocking because the things are quite expensive. If it's phones, whether it's computers, they're quite expensive. So you need to make sure that whatever you're stocking, you're going to be selling it, because if you don't sell it, then you're in trouble. You're going to get out of business because you don't have proper cash flow, yet things are consistently changing. And then number 6, publishing, and newspapers. Now, this is no secret. This is literally a dying business. But why is it a dying business? Number one, the startup costs compared to the competition are not low. You're going to have to get paper. That's something you need to buy. You're going to have to get printing equipment. You're going to have to use labor to do the work. You're going to have to do distribution, expenses, transport costs. If you're doing a newspaper, you need to distribute it all over the country. You're going to use vehicles, you're going to use, aeroplanes, whatever you're using to distribute the things. And those are all costs that you're going to face that your competition is not facing. And what is the competition? The internet, blogging and vlogging, people making content over the internet. These people, their startup costs are so low. All they need is probably a phone and they are done because everything else is available. They have the internet available. There is YouTube, there are all these websites that are available, some of them even free completely or very low costs to pay for hosting a website, for example, compared to doing printers and hiring people and all those kinds of things. The competition is very high with an industry where the barrier to entry is almost not there. So if you're not doing it properly, you're literally going to fail. But it doesn't matter how well you're doing it. Honestly, newspapers and publishing are literally dying industries. One that I would not advise you to do. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll leave a link right here to businesses that literally never fail. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Catch you very soon with another video. Lots of love. Bye-bye.